So here I am again tonight. I'm starting. I put up all some of the castles of the time of Normandy. Tried to anyway. And onward with this next group. We are talking 1177. I'm just going to continue from where it stopped last. Alice, the youngest daughter of Louis, was betrothed to Richard, a second son of the King of England. One of the conditions of the marriage treaty was that the princess should be brought up at the court of her father-in-law till such time as she arrived at years of maturity. Having now attained that period, Louis insisted that the consummation of their marriage should no longer be protracted. Henry, however, who had already experienced the evil effects of an alliance with France in the conduct of his eldest son, evinced a reluctance to comply with the request of Louis, which no motives of prudence nor policy could induce him to forego. The king, finding all his remonstrances ineffectual, made application to the Pope, who interposed his authority. Sorry, I have to shut the door. So yes, the policy he was they could induce him to forego. The king, finding all his remonstrances ineffectual, made application to the Pope, who interposed his authority by threatening to lay all the dominions of Henry under an interdict if he did not allow the marriage to be immediately consummated. To avert the impending danger, he thought it necessary to repair to the continent, and embarking at Portsmouth, in the mouth of August, arrived safe in France. A conference took place between the two monarchs in the following month, at which a legate from the Pope was present, and Henry found means to prevent the interdict and likewise to elude the immediate consummation of his son's marriage, on condition that he should assume the cross and accompany Louis in an expedition to the Holy Land. The reluctance evinced by the King of England to fill this article of treaty has been ascribed by several historians to an affection which he is said to have himself conceived for the destined comfort of his son, and most of them intimate that the young princess was seduced to comply with the king's criminal desires. But he had so many motives, I did go ahead and I updated the site to contain the transcript. Unfortunately, it's not edited. It's just so it's got a lot of my double sounding pronunciations, etc. But it's something anyway. Okay, so historians to an affection which he is said to have himself conceived for the destined consort. Oh, it's the destined consort of his son. And most of them intimate that the young princess was seduced to comply with the king's criminal desires. But he had so many motives, founded in justice and policy, to influence his conduct in this particular, that it is needless to seek for an extraordinary cause. Besides, his advanced age and consummate prudence render it highly improbable that he should have been guilty of an action that must have exposed him to universal detestation. A treaty of peace and alliance was concluded between Louis and Henry at this interview, the preamble of which is remarkable. We wish all the world to know that such is, and such in future ever will be, our friendship, that each of us will defend the life, the limbs, the dignity, and the possessions of the other. I, Henry, will assist Louis, King of France, my lord, with all my forces. I, Louis, will assist Henry, King of England, my man and my vassal, with all my power, saving nevertheless the faith which we reciprocally owe to our vassals, so long as they shall remain faithful. The two monarchs afterward adopted such measures as they thought necessary, not only to ensure success to their expedition against the infidels of Palestine, but to protect from insult their respective dominions during their absence. Neither of them, however, embarked in the perilous undertaking. The ardor of Louis was cooled down by his former misfortunes, and the nobility of France strongly remonstrated against the hazardous and unprofitable enterprise, while the embarrassed situation of his affairs rendered the presence of Henry necessary in his own kingdom. In 1179, an anxious regard for the succession of his crown and the tranquillity of his kingdom had induced Louis to bestow his hand on his present consort, and the birth of his son Philip had crowned his hopes and wishes. But his fears were soon alarmed for the safety of the young prince, whose horses ran away with him as he was pursuing the chase in the forest of Compiègne. Sequestered from the search of his attendants, the heir of France was condemned to pass a tedious night, oppressed by his solitude and despair. His feeble mind was incapable of sustaining the horror of his situation, and when found in the morning, a dangerous fit of illness was the effect of his fright. The king, in the middle of his grief, recollected his good friend Thomas A. Becket, at whose tomb he was assured numbers of miracles were daily performing. He therefore determined to solicit the interposition of a saint who had experienced his earthly protection, and accordingly repaired to England, accompanied by Philip, Count of Flanders. Baldwin, Count of Guienne, Henry, Duke of Louvain, William, Count of Mandeville, and by several other noblemen. He was received at Canterbury by Henry with royal hospitality and magnificence, and he there sought to conciliate the favour of Becket, not only by humiliation and prayer, but by splendid gifts and princely offerings. He left at his shrine a cup of gold, of admirable workmanship, and granted to the cathedral an annual tribute of 100 hogsheads of wine, to be sent from the royal mansion of Poissy at his own expense. He also granted an exception to the monks belonging to the church from all duties on whatever articles they might purchase in France. That they might purchase. All articles that they might purchase in France, which was confirmed by a charter to which he made his chancellor, Hugh de Ponto, affix the Great Seal. On the return of Louis to France, finding his health materially affected by the agitation he had experienced, he resolved to hasten the coronation of his son, who had perfectly recovered from his late illness. He was disabled, however, from attending the ceremony by a sudden stroke of apoplexy, which was followed by a paralytic affection in his right side that announced his speedy dissolution. Philip nevertheless was crowned in the presence of Henry, son of the English monarch, who, as Duke of Normandy, bore the royal diadem of the Count of Flanders, who carried the sword of the state, and by the other great vassals and officers of the crown. It is said that Louis, for the purpose of establishing better order and greater regularity at the ceremony, chose 12 peers of the realm to attend it, who afterwards formed that body, so celebrated in history under the appellation of the 12 peers of France, and who composed the chief council of the nation, and had in the sequel the exclusive right of fitting in the Parliament, or chief court of justice, of attending the beds of justice, and all other public ceremonies. At the same time, the Archbishop of Rheims had sufficient influence to secure for his church the exclusive right of anointing the kings of France, a prerogative which was confirmed by a bull of Pope Alexander III. The coronation of Philip was succeeded by the celebration of his marriage with Isabella, the daughter of Baldwin, Count of Hainaut. That princess was descended in a direct line from Ermengarde, the eldest daughter of the unfortunate Charles, Duke of Lorraine, brother to Lothaire II, and uncle to Louis V. The French still revered the memory of the Carlovingian princes, whom they generally distinguished by the honourable appellation of the Great Kings. This reunion of the royal families, this alliance of the blood of Charlemagne with the blood of Hugh Capet, gave them inexpressible pleasure. Philip of Alsace, Count of Flanders, uncle to the new queen, ceded to her husband the county of Artois, together with all his pretensions to that of Hainaut. In 1180, the tranquillity of Louis was established too late, and the progress of his disease could not be checked by the prospect of happiness. He died at Paris in the 16th year of his age, and the 60th. I'm always getting these ones wrong. He died at Paris in the 60th year of his age, and the 44th year of his reign. So he started at 16 as king, and was interred in his royal robes at the church belonging to the Abbey of Barbeau, 2 leagues from Melun, which he had founded and richly endowed. The character of this prince has been variously represented by different historians. By some he is said to have been just and upright in his conduct, but ingenious below mediocrity, bold in conception, but irresolute in execution, in danger timid, even to cowardice, and in manners simple, even to meanness. Others represent him as a king devoid of malice, a suspicious husband, a turbulent neighbour, and a too credulous man. But all in all here, the more ancient writers give him a very different character. One in particular assigns him all the valuable qualities of an honest man, united to the prudence and moderation of a sage, little skilled in literature, but generous, beneficent, and just, the protector of the laws, and the father of his people. The restoration of Eleonora's proof of his justice. Go back. So the older ancient writers saw him in a different light. Here he is. I like that phrase. United to the prudence and moderation of a sage. This really should be a course, like, a real course in school, in university. It has so many good sentences that you can pull out and go over. But because this is a reading only, I'm not doing that. Otherwise, this would be 3 months, and that would be on a daily. All right, so where are we here? Yeah. Okay, so I had him here. The restoration of Eleanor's dower, though mentioned by some as a mark of imbecility, was having a strong proof of his justice. But his conduct with regard to Henry, whose tranquillity he disturbed by exciting his sons to rebel, appears to be a well-founded subject of censure and reproach, though it is necessary to observe that the fact is not mentioned by any of the French historians. Upon the whole, his virtues greatly overbalanced his defects, nor can that character be regarded as doubtful in which humanity and piety form the leading features. All right. So he excited his sons to become rebels and rebel. Louis had 3 wives: Eleonora of Guienne, whom he repudiated, Constance of Castile, who died in childbed, and Adela, or Alice of Champagne, who survived him. By the first wife he had 2 daughters: Mary, wife to Henry I, Count of Champagne, and Alice, married to Thibault, Count of Valois, and brother to Henry. The second gave birth to 2 princesses, Alice, who died in her infancy, and Margaret, who first married Henry, son to the King of England, and afterward Abella, King of Hungary. By his third wife, he had Philip, who succeeded to the throne, and 2 princesses, Adela or Alice, betrothed to Richard, son to the English monarch, but married to William, Count of Ponthieu, and Agnes, who was first affianced to Alexis Comnenus, Emperor of the East, afterwards married to Andronicus, who murdered that prince and usurped his throne, and lastly wife to a private gentleman named Theodore Branas, with whom she first lived during a considerable time as his mistress. Okay. That's unusual. A royalty living as a mistress now. Okay. So next we've got Philip II, surnamed Augustus. In 1181, when Philip assumed the reins of government, he was but in his 15th year. Another young one. The Count of Flanders, the uncle of his queen, was suffered to enjoy the name and honours of regent, but although his counsels might influence, his authority was never permitted to control the inclination of the youthful monarch, who soon displayed the most evident symptoms of an unbounded thirst for dominion, and a zealous desire to extend the royal prerogative. From his birth, which established the peaceable succession to the crown of France, Philip attained the very expressive surname of the gift of God as he advanced in life. His vanity was gratified by the appellation conferred on him by his courtier and conqueror and magnanimous, and after his death the surname of Augustus, which was added to his other titles. The first and last of these names might be due to the auspicious moment in which he entered the world, and the manner in which he conducted himself through it. But his rage for conquest was opportunely checked by the personal valour of Richard of England and his magnanimity. I can't pronounce that one. I'm sorry. Magnanimity. Yeah. Magnanimity is it's almost 2 words smashed together. Is but ill attested by the envious perfidy with which he deserted that prince on the hostile shores of Palestine. Louis imagined he had taken every necessary precaution for the prevention of disorders in the kingdom on the accession of his son, but the jealousy and ambition of the nobles rendered those precautions fruitless. The precautions were fruitless. The princes of Champagne, uncles to the young monarch, were envious of the influence and authority of the Count of Flanders. The Queen Mother joined in their complaints and loudly insisted that her claims to the regency were infinitely preferable to those of a foreigner, whose interests in the welfare of her son she represented as feeble and doubtful. The Count of Sancerre was the first to hoist the standard of rebellion, but the youthful ardour of Philip gave a timely check to his progress by reducing his castles, ravaging his estates, and laying waste his possessions with fire and sword. The Queen Dowager next displayed her resentment, and by her treaty to Normandy involved the whole kingdom in confusion. She experienced a favourable reception from the English monarch, who willingly consented to grant I know it feels like I've read this one already. Who willingly consented to grant the assistance she required, and repairing to Normandy, advanced with a numerous army to second her demands. But Philip was already prepared to encounter a prince whom he regarded as his hereditary foe, and the King of England. Either doubtful of the event, or influenced by those sentiments of equity and moderation by which his conduct was generally actuated, consented to listen to terms of accommodation. Even in the arts of negotiation, Philip displayed a degree of caution, vigour, and wisdom far beyond his years. Averse from either extreme, he rejected the presumptuous claims of the rebels and the advice of the Count of Flanders to decide the dispute by the sword. Though to his mother he professed a proper degree of duty as a son. He possessed a proper degree of duty. He asserted, nevertheless, the independent authority of a sovereign. He offered a free pardon to the nobles who had engaged in the revolt, and Henry, urging them to submit, an accommodation took place, in which the former peace between the crowns of France and England was confirmed. The return of the Queen Dowager to Paris proved fatal to the authority of the regent. That princess, seconded by two of the king's favourites, the lords of Coucy and Clermont, incessantly remonstrated with her son on the impropriety of entrusting the reins of government to a nobleman, whose power was already so extensive by the possession of so many rich and fertile provinces. They represented him as a prince of violent disposition, incapable of restraint in the gratification of his passions, either by the duties of religion or the dictates of honour. In short, such was the impression which their callous assertions made on the mind of the young monarch, that the Count soon perceived a very sensible change in his conduct, but far from seeking to stem the torrent, he prudently withdrew from the scene of contention and retired to his own dominions without uttering a single expression of resentment. This is all about Philip II's reign. The management of affairs was then entrusted to Robert Clement, of Metz, to whom the education of Philip had been confided by the late king. He is spoken of by historians as a man of strict integrity and possessed of every quality that could fit him for a situation so arduous and delicate that great hopes were consequently formed of his administration. But these were speedily destroyed by his sudden death. He was succeeded in his office and dignities by his brother, Gilles Clement, but he too died in a few months. Okay, everybody's dying. After his elevation, and made way for the Cardinal of Champagne, brother to the Queen Dowager, who was appointed to the presidency of the council and the post of prime minister. The commencement of this prelate's administration was marked by an act of rigor, which has been alternately commended as prudent and politic, and censured as cruel and unjust. This was the banishment of the Jews. Okay, first time now I have president and prime minister in one sentence. They're using a president in the terminology as presidency of the council. That, it's a funny one. Anyway, that people, okay, so now we're talking about the banishment of the Jews next. That people in whose disposition, industry, and avarice were inseparably blended had by oppressive usury acquired, if ancient authors may be credited, 1/3 of the landed property throughout the dominions of Philip. The improbability of this circumstance is considerably diminished when we consider that the nobles themselves were not ashamed to encourage their practices and to partake their profits. The protection they had thus acquired emboldened them in the pursuit of their infamous traffic, and increased their insolence to such a degree that when a debtor was unable to pay their exorbitant demands, they compelled him to renounce his liberty and become their slave. Philip, willing to relieve his subjects from such oppression, had recourse to a hermit named Bernard, who resided in the wood of Vincennes, by whose advice he resolved to expel all the Jews from his territories. He accordingly issued an edict by which they were ordered to quit the kingdom in 3 months. All their real property was confiscated, and the debts that were due to them declared null, on condition that the debtors should pay a 5th part of the sum they owed to the king. Their movable effects and ready money they were permitted to take with them, but even this indulgence was in a great measure rendered futile by the short time allowed them to profit by it. After the expiration of the term prescribed by the edict, every species of violence was exercised against them. Their synagogues were all converted into churches. Though the conduct of the Jews indisputably required correction, both speedy and effectual, yet surely it was not necessary to substitute cruelty and oppression for rigid and impartial justice. The severity of the decree admits not of excuse, it was evidently dictated by fanaticism, and the circumstances attending its execution afford the most incontestable evidence that the severity of Philip was influenced by motives of interest. To exonerate debtors who had long groaned, beneath the oppressive exactions of avarice might be proper, but to appropriate to his own use a fifth part of the debts that were due to others was to sanction that injustice which he pretended to condemn. In a political point of view, too, his conduct was highly censurable, since he deprived himself of a number of subjects, whose labours, when directed into a proper channel and submitted to the salutary restraints of law, might have proved highly beneficial to the state. Confined must be the comprehension, shallow the judgment, and feeble the talents of that politician who knows not how to convert the channel of abuse into a source of utility, and who prefers destruction to reformation. In 1182 and 1183, the other regulations which Philip adopted at this period are more worthy of commendation. He enlarged his capital by enclosing within its walls the neighbouring villages, strengthened its fortifications, increased its buildings, and established rules, not less wholesome than necessary, for the preservation of order and cleanliness. He diminished the number of those unfortunate women who infested the streets, and made places the most sacred the scene of their prostitutions. And made places the most sacred the scene of their prostitutions. Yeah, it's the way they write, isn't it? Yeah, it's very interesting how they lag through on the wording. Yeah, but yes. A worthy priest named Peter de Roffi undertook to convert them, and by the piety of his precepts and the ardour of his exhortations, he so far succeeded as to render many of them useful members of society. Numbers were afterwards married and discharged the duty of wife and mother with a strictness and propriety that bespoke the sincerity of their conversion, while not a few of them took the veil in the convent of Saint Anthony in Paris, which was founded about this time for the purpose of affording them a safe and comfortable retreat. Nor was Philip less attentive to the welfare and prosperity of the provinces. The mercenary soldiers who had served in the wars of his father had spread themselves over the defenceless country and indulged in every species of wanton outrage. The king sent a numerous army to repel these marauders, and his orders were executed so effectually that not one of them escaped the fury of the troops. In 1184, such was the situation of affairs when a serious dispute arose between the king and the Count of Flanders. That prince had married Elizabeth, granddaughter to Hugh the Great, in whose right... Yeah, I was checking if I was recording. Yeah, I've done that before, believe it or not. I forgot, I didn't push the record button. Okay, so here he is. He's at the mercenary soldiers who had served in the wars of his father had spread themselves over the defenceless country and indulged in every species of wanton outrage. The king sent a numerous army to repel these marauders, and his orders were executed so effectually that not one of them escaped the fury of the troops. In 1184, such was the situation of affairs when a serious dispute, see, I reread that one again, damn it. A serious dispute arose between the king and the Count of Flanders. That prince had married Elizabeth, granddaughter to Hugh the Great, in whose right he enjoyed the counties of Vermandois, Valois, and Amiens. The princess dying without children, Philip summoned the count to restore those rich domains, offering to prove by the testimony of the archbishop, bishops, counts, viscounts, and viscounts, and other princes that these three counties belonged to him by right of succession. The count, on the contrary, maintained that the late king had given him a simple and unconditional grant of them, which had confirmed by Philip himself. But the king replied that no monarch of France could alienate the possessions of the crown, and that as the count only enjoyed the territories in question in virtue of his marriage with Elizabeth of Vermandois, his right, of course, ceased on the death of that princess. It was not likely that a matter of such importance could be decided by argument or reason. Recourse was accordingly had to the lex ultima regum, and the Count of Flanders in vain endeavoured to allure the barons to his standard by representing the injury as general and the cause as common. Almost alone and unsupported, his efforts were impotent and unsuccessful, and after a short struggle, distinguished by no remarkable occurrence, and in which he neither gained honour, advantage, he listened to the voice of prudence, submitted to the king, and restored the counties of Vermandois and Amiens, together with that of Sancerre, which were accordingly re-annexed to the crown. The queen, during this contest, influenced by motives of gratitude in opposition to the conjugal duty, had imprudently expressed a wish that her uncle, the Count of Flanders, might succeed in his attempts. The king, enraged at her conduct, peremptorily commanded her to quit his court, and gave orders to assemble a synod, that his marriage might be dissolved on the usual pretext of consanguinity. Everything seemed favourable to his wishes. Both prelates and courtiers, with a servile adulation, repeated their reasons. The Bishop of Sens was the only person who had repeated the reasons urged by their sovereign, and were loud in their censure of the unfortunate Isabella. The Bishop of Sens was the only person who had sufficient virtue and resolution to stem the torrent of invective and to oppose the rash resolution of the monarch. A witness to the sentence of divorce was impeded. The Count of Hainaut informed of the misfortune that threatened his daughter, hastened to Pontos, where she was confined, and by his paternal remonstrances persuaded her to write an affectionate and submissive letter to the king. A reconciliation accordingly took place. Isabella was restored to favour, and her charms and her virtues speedily effaced the resemblance of her past misconduct, and recovered the affectations of her offended husband. I can't read any more tonight, I'm sorry. I was just getting back into it after a few days off, and I think it was one of my worst, but that's the way life goes. So we're next going to start at 1185 through 1187 as a place card there.